We'll give a quick introduction to zakat. As was announced tonight, inshallah, we'll have a quick introduction to the importance of zakah and some of the fundamentals and basics on what we should bear in mind when we are preparing to give our zakah. First and foremost, when we think about the topic of zakah, it's essential to remember that giving in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is extremely rewarding. Giving to the poor, giving to your family, giving to the needy, these are all avenues of spending in charitable causes. However, no matter how much money you spend in voluntary actions, all of that on one side cannot compare in value to even $1 in zakah, because zakah is fard. And let's bear that in mind. Oftentimes I think about giving some money here, giving some money there, there's a big cause, I'm sending it, I have family, I'm giving them money. But the moment it comes time for zakah, I'm trying to cut corners. Yeah, maybe I don't have to give for this, oh maybe I don't have to give for this, oh this is too much, I'll give now, I'll think about it later. Zakah is something we should never cut corners. One of the most graphic torments mentioned in the Quran is regarding that person who doesn't give zakah. The most descriptive punishment in the Quran, it comes in Surah At-Tawbah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes how the person who does not give zakah will be punished. That person's wealth will be made into flames, fire, molten gold, and will be used to burn that person. So the first thing is, it's very rewarding to do it, but the punishment of not doing it is equally severe, and we ask Allah's protection from that. Because in Islam, there's very few things that we have to do. There are many things we're recommended to do, but there are a few things that we have to do. Do I have to pray tahajjud? No, it's good. Do I have to help out, in broader community affairs? No, it's good. There are things that are good to do, but there are certain things we have to do, and from those 5 things, zakat is one of them. There should be no laxity on the matter. We're not going to get into too much details about the virtues, that can be for another conversation. We will run through some of the basic conditions for zakah. So, the first thing to bear in mind is zakah is fard. Fard meaning just like my salah, just like my hajj, just like Ramadan, zakah is fard upon me. But who is it fard upon? There are a few conditions. The first condition is the person has sanity. Some people, they struggle with very serious mental health issues. For them, zakah is forgiven. But what do we mean by mental health issues? This is a lengthy topic. Not somebody who has anxiety or depression. We're talking about somebody who is not in control of their faculties. They can't speak properly, they can't walk properly. That person doesn't have to give zakah. So the first condition is sanity. You have to be sane. The second condition is to be baligh, to reach puberty. Roughly the age of 15, 16, whatever the age is, the person reaches bulugh. There is no zakah for little children. So if a child has a lot of wealth, that child, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, does not have to give zakah. Some of the scholars like Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that the child also has to give zakah, but according to Imam Abu Hanifa, children do not have to give zakah. So sometimes a father buys some stocks for the child or some investment for the child and puts it to the side. There's no zakat on that for the child. As an adult, zakat is necessary for both male and female. This is important to bear in mind. The male has to give his own zakah, and the female has to give her own zakah. No one person is by default responsible for the other. Husband and wife, it's not the default that the husband has to pay the wife's zakah. Yes, out of generosity, kindness, mutual understanding, the husband wants to give the wife zakah, 100% fine. But he needs her permission. The husband wants to give zakah, he needs permission from the wife. Just giving it does not count. You need to ask for permission that I am giving zakah on your behalf. Do you allow? And if she allows, then it counts. So the first condition is sanity. The second condition is adulthood. And remember, adulthood doesn't mean when you're 18. There are some teenagers who are 15 years old and they are baligh. And mashallah, they have decent amount of wealth in investments and other types of funds. They have to give zakah. The third condition is you need to meet the nisab. What is nisab? Nisab means the threshold. So, we're going to discuss this later, but the threshold is either based on gold or based on silver. Certain amount of gold, certain amount of silver. I don't want to give the exact number because literally every day that number fluctuates. For gold, recently, just a few months ago, it was give or take $5,000. The nisab for gold, 5,300, 5,200 is fluctuating. Give or take $5,000. So when someone, in terms of gold, reaches that amount, they have to give zakah. The other standard is known as the silver standard. Meaning, the hadith says you need to have 200 silver coins. Now, how much does that count? About 600 grams of silver, which is the equivalent, every day it changes, but give or take $500 to $600. Now, as you can see, the gold amount is $5,000, right? When we're looking at the nisab can either be calculated according to gold or according to silver. And as you can tell, the silver amount is only 500 and the gold amount is 5,000. So there's a huge fluctuation. So a number of muftis, contemporary muftis, they say it's best and most in consideration in today's time to look at the gold amount. The gold amount is roughly $5,000. So if somebody has that amount of money, once they reach adulthood, they have to give zakah. Now, if somebody feels, you know what, 5,000 is a lot of money, I want to get the reward of zakah as well. If you go with the silver standard and say 500 is the amount, there's nothing wrong with it. But if we make 500 the standard, it can become very difficult for people. In the time of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the value of silver was very high. That's why it made sense that this nisab was with silver. Now the value of silver has plummeted and decreased. So in consideration of the poor, أنفع للفقراء, the better option is to go with the gold amount, which is give or take 5,000. Whenever your day of zakah comes, you should double check that amount. And if you see that you've reached that, then zakah is due. However, just reaching the nisab is not enough. I am sane, I am an adult, I have in my bank, hypothetically, $6,000. Just having 6,000 is not enough. Once you have that money, you need an entire year to pass on that money. So for instance, I'm going through a tough time, I never had money, I'm 16, 17, 18, I still have like 1,000 in my bank, 2,000 in my bank, not the full amount. It just so happens that this year, on Ramadan 10th, I got a new job and I earned money, and now I have $6,000 in my bank account. I don't have to give zakah right away. I need an entire year to pass with that amount in my bank. If it goes beneath that and a year does pass, then I don't have to give zakah. I have to wait a year with that entire amount. If a year passes and I only have $2,000, then I don't have to give zakah. Is that much clear so far? We need to be sane, adult, male, female, nisab, and one entire year needs to reach on that nisab. The next point, I need to be absolved of debts. I need to be absolved of debts. What does this mean? I have in the bank, let's say, $6,000. We said the nisab hypothetically is $5,000. So technically, I have the nisab amount and I have to give 2.5% of my $6,000. However, if I owe someone money, if I owe someone money, then I will subtract that amount from the nisab. So, I borrowed from my brother $3,000. So, although I have $6,000 in the bank, $3,000 is a loan, is a debt. And because of that, my own money is only $3,000. So I did not reach the threshold of $5,000. I do not have to give zakah. Now, there's a bigger question, and I would come to it later, but let me just deal with it right now. There's something known as long-term loans. For instance, mortgage, car loan, student loan. Many people, they have student loans, they have car loans, they have house loans. Hypothetically, a person buys a house for $300,000. Now, if I only put a small down payment and I owe $250,000, that means for the rest of my life I'm in debt and I never have to give zakah. So the ulama, they say, no. When you have a long-term loan, you don't look at the life of the loan. You don't look at the full amount. What you look at is either the amount that you're going to give in 1 year or 1 month. Both are fine. But let's just go with 1 year. Let's say every year my mortgage amount, everything together, I'm paying roughly $25,000, hypothetically. Then when my zakat day comes, in terms of loans, $25,000 will be subtracted. So let's take an example. Let's say in my bank, I have $50,000. And now I have a house that I am paying monthly on. The value of the house is like $300,000. But every year, if I put together 12 months of mortgage or 12 months of payment, it comes out to $25,000. Then although I have $50,000 in my bank, in reality, I will subtract this $25,000 and I only have $25,000 left. Is that clear? So I will only give zakah on 2.5% of 25,000 because a certain amount, half of it, is going into the mortgage for a year. That's in terms of loans. There are other types of loans. For instance, a couple just gets married. The mahar amount is $10,000. In many cases, couples, they get married and they don't give the mahar right away. They say they're going to give the mahar over time. The amount that is due for mahar, they will subtract that from the zakat amount. Again, as you can see over here, the idea is you will not calculate into the amount you owe when you are looking at your nisab. Your loans are going to be excluded from this amount. Now there are many other questions. If you get a chance, we'll get to it. 401k, pensions, this investment, that investment. We can talk about that later. Right now we're talking about the fundamental principles. What are the basic principles? Okay, so those are the conditions. Now the next topic under this is, which things do I give zakat on? So I have the nisab amount. What are things that I calculate in order to determine the zakat amount? So there are a few things. Number one, my gold and silver. If I have pure gold and silver, jewelry, gold nuggets, whatever the case, if I have gold and silver, I will calculate zakat on that. That's the first thing. Now, in terms of gold, there's a lot of conversation. Okay, it has to be more than 50%, then it's gold. If it's less than 50%, we can't get into specifics now, otherwise we'll be here all night. For right now, gold and silver. So that applies to our mothers and sisters. They have a lot of jewelry. So the value of that jewelry will contribute towards the nisab. Now, how do you find out what value is for the gold? You have to go to the local gold seller and tell them to find out what's the market value of the jewelry. And they value the jewelry together and they'll say it's $13,000. For instance, that's the market value. The selling value, the buying price is a bit different. Sometimes they're going to buy it for much lower. Sometimes they will sell it for much higher. You ask them what's the average market value of it, and they will give you that amount, and that is the value of the gold and silver. So that's the first thing, gold and silver. The second is cash. whatever cash I have, either in hand, investments, we can talk about this later, but for right now, any cash that I have, what's in my bank, physical cash that I have in my house, stored away, all of that will be calculated into my nisab amount. That's the second thing, cash. Number 3, business. Whatever I have for business. Let's say, for instance, I have some money in an investment. I bought a property of land with the intention of selling it. There's a land, I bought it and I say my intention is to sell it. That land is for business. The value of the land is $100,000. Then in terms of zakah, I will calculate that into the amount that I owe. But it's important that my intention is to sell. If I bought that land with the intention that, yeah, I'll buy it now, I'll see later if the value goes up, if the value goes down, I'm not certain, then there's no zakat. You need to have 100% intention of selling, then only you give zakah, otherwise you don't give zakah on it. Let's say you buy a plot of land, and in your mind you're like, okay, I might build a house on it, I might sell it, let me see how things go. There's no zakat on that. Only when you say, I'm buying this with the intention of selling. Then number 4 is money that you gave people and they owe you. One is money I owe someone else, but the other is money that somebody owes me. My brother is in financial need. I give him $5,000 as a loan. I still have to give zakah on that money. $5,000 I gave him, I have to give zakat on that money. Because somebody has to give it. He's not going to pay because it's a loan. I have to pay because it's money that I gave him. Okay, so these are the 4 main ones. There are some others, but for right now, I think let's just remember these 4. Because you have farm animals, and I don't know if anybody has a farm over here. If you do, inshallah, we can speak privately later on. But we'll leave some of the categories out. Right now, gold and silver, cash, business and trade, and whatever money people owes me. People owe me money, then that also will be taken into consideration. Now, there are certain things that beside this you do not calculate zakat on. For instance, my house. If I have 10 houses, mansions, each worth $5 million, hypothetically, I have 10 mansions, but I'm not selling those homes, there's no zakat on these homes. If I have 3 cars, I'm not selling the cars, I drive the car. One day I drive this, one day I drive that. There's no zakat on the cars. My basic needs, my clothes, my furniture, there's no zakat on these things. Only zakat comes on those things that we mentioned above. Is that clear? When we said gold and silver, remember, that means there's no zakat on diamonds, there's no zakat on, precious stones, emeralds. Zakat is specifically on gold and silver, not on precious stones. Now, there are two things to bear in mind. One is, when do I have to give zakah? The other is, when can I receive zakah? Many people, they ask, oh, I have a brother, I have an aunt, I have an uncle, I have a cousin. I want to give them zakah. Can I give them zakat or not? There's a question that comes, my uncle, my aunt, who can I give zakat to, who can I not give zakat to? The most important thing is, in terms of family, you can give to anybody except usul and furu'. In Arabic, usul and furu' means going up and going down. I cannot give it to my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. You can't go up. And you can't go down. My children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, you can't give them. Anybody else you can give them. Your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, your cousin, your nephew, your niece, your neighbor, you can give them. You can give any of them zakah. However, And we're going to come to this later again, but I just might as well just mention it right now. When we talk about eligibility of receiving zakah, it's a bit complicated. Because when I have to give zakah, what did we say the nisab was? Hypothetically, $5,000 from gold, silver, all of that. Do I give zakah on my house? Do I calculate that? No. When I'm giving zakah, I don't factor in my house because that's my basic need. What if I have a second house? Let's say I have $0 in the bank. I have a house worth $200,000. It's my basic need, I don't have to give zakah. I have a second house worth $300,000. Do I have to give zakah? No. Why? Because even though it's an extra house, is it gold? Is it silver? Is it cash? Is it business? No. So I don't have to give zakah. This is in terms of giving zakah. However, in terms of receiving zakah, it's more strict. If I have over my basic necessities anything extra in the form of whether it's gold, silver, houses, cars, anything extra, I cannot take zakah. Let's say, for instance, in my bank, I literally have $0. You would think I'm poor. I don't have a job, I don't have anything. I have $0 in my bank. I have my house. If I only have one house and the value of the house is $2 million, but it's the house that I live in, I can take zakah. Why? Because this house is my basic need. I live in the house. But let's say I have $0 in the bank. I have no job. I have my $1 million house I live in, but I have a second house that's worth $200,000. I am not allowed to take zakah. Because even though I have no money in the bank, I have an extra home that I'm not living in. How can I be poor if I have a second home that I don't even need to live in? The Sharia will say, how are you taking zakah when you have an extra home over here? Sell your home and live with that money. I'm poor, I don't have a job. I have 2 cars. And I don't need the second car. It's not my basic need. I'm driving like a Ferrari, an extra car. And I have my normal day-to-day. I have no money, I have no job. Because I have an extra car, now I am not allowed to take zakah. Why? Because in terms of receiving zakah, we calculate everything, not only gold and silver and cash and business, we calculate everything. So a lot of times when people ask, can I send money to my uncle, to my aunt, to my family members, make sure they don't have extra properties, because sometimes they have extra land. Sometimes they have extra, cars and stuff. They don't have money, but they have so many extra things that collectively amount to more than the nisab amount. Okay, the other question now is, so that's in terms of who you can give zakat to, because there's the nisab of giving zakah, and then there's the nisab of receiving zakah. Now, when I am giving zakah, there are a few conditions. The first condition is niyyah, intention. I can never give zakah without intention. What's an example of giving zakah without intention? For instance, the masjid box is coming. In some masjid they do this, like the masjid donation box is coming. I put in $200 and the box goes, and I think, oh man, I should have made niyyah of zakah. But when I put it in, I didn't make intention of zakah. It does not count as zakah anymore. I can't retroactively make intention of zakah. A poor person comes, asks for money, there's an organization asking for money, I put $1,000. 2 days later, I find out that there's zakat eligible. I can't say, oh no, my intention now is zakah. You need intention of zakah before you give the money. That's the first condition. The second condition is known, and this is very important, very important. The second condition is known as tamlik, ownership. If I am giving someone zakah, that person needs to take ownership. I cannot give zakah to buildings. I cannot give zakah to efforts. I cannot give zakah to build something. I have to give zakah to the poor. For instance, someone said that I'm building an orphanage. Can I give zakah to building the orphanage? In theory, you cannot give zakat money in building something. What you can do is give the orphans the money, and if they decide to spend that money in building the orphanage, that's fine. But let's say there's no orphans anywhere, and I say for future I want to build it. Another example is the masjid. Can I give my zakah towards the masjid? According to the dominant opinion of majority of scholars, you cannot give zakah money to the masjid. Now, some scholars may say yes, some scholars may say there's some leeway. I'm not going to disagree with that. Everybody has a legitimate opinion, fine, alhamdulillah. But the dominant opinion, the vast majority of scholars say, if you're giving your money, you give it to the poor, do not give it to just a masjid or an organization. For instance, there's an organization that says we do advocacy. For the oppressed, for the poor, for that, we advocate on their behalf. Can they take zakah? According to the dominant opinion, the majority of schools, they say you cannot give zakah for such efforts. It has to be given as ownership to the poor. The other thing is, when I am giving zakah, I can give zakah directly to the poor, or I can give zakah to someone else to give to the poor. It's not necessary that I give the money right away. Let's say, for instance, in my village back home, there's an orphanage and there's poor people and they need money. I don't have to go and physically give their money. I can give money to the principal and say, here's $2,000, distribute it among the poor, buy food and give it to the poor. You can do that, that's fine. They don't have to take it, you don't have to give it to them directly. The other ruling is, you can give zakah in advance. Let's say for me, my zakat date is Shawwal, after Ramadan. But I want the rewards of Ramadan. I can give my zakah before the due date. However, when my due date comes, I have to recalculate. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, Shawwal the 10th is my day of zakah. Shawwal the 10th is my day of zakah. But I want to give my zakah beforehand in Ramadan. So in Ramadan, in my bank, I have $10,000. I have no loans, I have nothing. And I say, I want the reward, so I'm going to give in Ramadan. So I give 2.5% of $10,000, $250, I give it. But when is my zakat date? 10th of Shawwal, it's the next month. When 10th of Shawwal comes, in my bank, I don't have 10,000, now I have 15,000. So there's $5,000 that I did not give zakat on. I have to give that difference back. What happens if it's less? In Ramadan, I gave 10,000, but by the end of the 10th of Shawwal, I only have 7,000. Then the zakat I gave for 3,000 will count towards my next year. Will count towards my next year. Now, who can I give zakat to? These are known as the masarif zakah. Who's eligible to receive my zakat? إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل. In the Quran, Allah mentions who the recipients of zakat are. The most important is obviously the faqir, the poor person. When I'm giving zakah, it's recommended that you give your zakah locally. But if you want to give it back home internationally, there's a need in Syria, there's a need in Burma, there's a need in these other countries, then you can give your zakat there too. It's permissible, but it's better to give your zakah locally. You understand from the hadith that it's best to give it locally because you want the people local to benefit. The best way to reconcile this is let me give some back home because I have family, but then let me give some over here as well so that my community can benefit from my zakah. It's so unfortunate, you won't believe how many people are deserving of zakah in our own locality. When I mean locality, I'm not talking about Plano, I'm talking about Irving. Muslims in Irving, you just have to speak to Brother Nuruddin or speak to the brothers over there. They'll tell you how many people who come to our masjid and they're deserving of zakah. So we should give our zakah. Some should definitely be local as well. Now, when I give my zakah, this is the last masala, it's getting a bit late. I'll mention this and then we can open it for some questions and answers. Once I give my zakah, sometimes it happens I give my zakah and I find out later that the person is rich. This happens often when I'm trying to find out something. I have a neighbor. Let's say for instance I have a neighbor and I'm seeing that they're struggling. I did some homework, some research, and I found out that my neighbor is poor. So I go and I give a small gift. I don't tell him it's zakah because you don't have to say it's zakah. I just give him a gift. A week later, I find out that the person is rich. They have a lot of money. My zakah counts. I do not have to give the zakah again. Because I did my research, I assumed. This happens a lot when back home, you're trying to figure out, but it's a bit uncomfortable to ask, oh, how much money do you have in your bank? Or are you rich or not? You do your homework a bit. Ask some neighbors, try to figure out, give your zakah. If it turns out you made a mistake, inshallah, Allah will forgive you. Now, one last mas'ala, because a lot of people will ask this, then I can open it for Q&A, is the mas'ala of 401k. Let's say, for instance, I have an investment. Normal investments, you have to give zakah on that. Normal investments, what do I mean? Let's say, for instance, somebody is starting a business or investment property. Somebody's building a house and the house is going for, let's say, $500,000. I put in some money, I put in $100,000. They're going to sell it at a certain amount. That house is an investment, I have to give zakat on that. However, what about 401k? How does 401k work? Every month from my bank, they extract some money and it goes into a fund. And every month they do this. I can only take from that fund when I reach a particular age. Let's say when I reach the age of 60, I'm only allowed to take from that fund. If I take before it, I can take it, but they're going to give me a penalty. They're going to give me a penalty. Do I have to give zakah on 401k or not? The dominant opinion, the scholars go with, the dominant, meaning the rajih, the strongest opinion is, yes, you have to give zakah on your 401k. If you want, you can give it yearly, or if you want, you can give zakah once you take your 401k out. For all of the years together, you can give it out. You can, either way you can go with it. Now that's the dominant opinion. There are some scholars, however, who say because you don't have complete ownership of your money. If you had complete ownership, you can take it out right away. But when I'm taking it, I'm getting a penalty, so I don't have complete ownership. So a number of scholars, they say you don't have to give zakah. Only time you have to give zakah is once you get that money, when you're 60 or whenever, that's the only time you give zakah once you get that money. For the years you have, you don't have to give the money. The reason I mention both opinions is, both opinions are legitimate. I am not going to say you have to follow one over the other, but I will suggest that the opinion that's most accurate, most strong, is that you give zakah on 401k, pension funds, whatever these funds are, where you give it and you can't take it right away. But if you feel that I listened to a scholar who told me that I don't have to give it, I am not going to say you're committing haram. That's an opinion you're following, alhamdulillah. But the general mas'ala is, like I said in the beginning, when it comes to zakah, let's do our best to be cautious and do our best to get as much as reward. Subhanallah, there's so much we can talk about zakah, we can go on all night. There's still 5 minutes left. Maybe if the brothers have some questions, inshallah, we can take some questions and we can end with that. Yes, brother. Yeah. So that's a good question. So if I understood your question, the question is, I own 2 homes. My second home I'm putting on rent. Is that the question? Yes. There's no zakat on property that you have for rent. If I'm leasing out my house, there's no zakat. Zakat is only on the money that I am going to get from that rental property. So by the end of the year, let's say I get $1,000 a month. If I have that money in my bank, I give zakat on that, but I do not give zakat on the property itself. Yes, I saw a brother had his hand up over here. Yes. So once I get the Nisab amount, which is $5,000, let's say I get it today, I have to look at the Islamic date. And whatever the Islamic date is, Sha'ban 3rd, 4th, whatever the date is, I look at that date and I say, Sha'ban the 5th is my zakat. Once a year passes, next year, this time is when I have to give zakat. Yes? Yeah. Sure.
I have heard that if you are already sahib nisab and even on Shaban 15 you got $1 million, on first Ramadan it will be due $1 million.
Yeah.
$1 million only passes 15 days, but you are already sahib nisab.
Sure. So
You will have to pay every day.
Sure.
Every day is 1 year.
Sure. So the question you're asking is known as mal mustafad. In Arabic, this is known as mal mustafad. In the beginning of the year, let's say my date is Ramadan 1. I have $10,000. It's going up, it's going down, it's always changing. The next year, in Sha'ban, somehow I get a good business and I make $1 million. For that first money that I had, it's going to be a year in Ramadan first, but when we're in the beginning of Ramadan first, I only had that $1 million for 1 month. So do I give zakat on the whole amount? Or do I only give zakat on the amount, incrementally speaking, that a year passed? According to the Hanafi school, once your first day of Ramadan comes, you have to give zakat on all the money you had, whether you had that money for a month, whether you had it for a day, whether you had it for a year. According to Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, you look at the incremental amount accordingly. So if I had a business, and I made $1 million right before Ramadan, and Ramadan first is my due date, that's only my due date for that amount that I started with. For this $1 million, I need another year to pass. And that's their opinion, and it can get a bit complicated how I'm going to pay every single time the money increases, and keeping scores and records is hard. But again, the Hanafi position on the matter is, when your day of zakah comes, you have to give zakat on everything that you own, even if it hasn't been a year since you owned it. Because so the question is, if I have a rental property, I'm making a certain amount every month, I have in my mind that I might sell it at some point, so why is it not treated as a business property? The reason is, the fuqaha and the ulama explain, something is considered a business property when you are actively selling it. You bought it with the intention of selling it and you are actively selling it. So if in my mind I'm like, I might sell it at some point, I hopefully will sell it, that is not 100% conviction, so you don't treat it as business property. Yes.
If you're taking out the money, zakah money, every month, suppose Ramadan is finished, you paid everything for the last year. And this year, start paying again. If you know that you're going to have this certain money, so you're paying it. Now, at the time of the zakah money, time of the paying the zakah again, we count those money you already paid?
Yes. So the question is, let's say for instance, Ramadan first, I have $10,000 in my bank and I have to give $250. Next year, Ramadan first, I estimate I'll have roughly the same amount, but instead of giving $250 one day, every month I'm going to give $10. Every month I'm going to give $10 with the intention of zakah. When the next Ramadan first comes, all the amount that I give, I calculate it together. Oh, I gave 200 already. Right now I only have to give $50. Brother, you had your question, yes.
So, I have $10,000 and I pay Zakah this year. So the next year also I have the same money.
Yeah.
Do I need to pay Zakah for the
Yes. If you still own it, you give zakah on the same amount. Yes, brother.
Suppose you have $1,000 and you're giving to an organization, and they say, this is zakat money, but what happens is they charge about 15% of that amount.
Yeah.
So that's not going to needy people. So do you take that extra amount and
So that's a good question. The question is, if I'm giving money to an organization, let's say $1,000 and they're going to feed the poor. Now, 10% of that money they're going to use for logistics and administration. Does that count? The vast majority of ulama say it does count because in the Quran Allah says, وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. The people who are collecting zakah, a portion of that zakah can go towards them. Yes. So a toddler has, a child has gold that was gifted to her, and gold. There is no zakat on children. So since there's no zakat on children, nobody has to pay zakat on that until she reaches bulugh.
So we buy jewelry for the kid and for my daughter and
No zakat on that. No zakat on that. The Hanafi position is you have to give zakah on gold regardless. Some ulama, like Imam Shafi and others, they say jewelry that you use, there's no zakat on that. But again, just to be consistent, I'm just mentioning what the Hanafi position is on everything. Yes, brother.
Suppose I'm earning good amount of money, but I never save it. I don't have gold or silver, but I'm eating out and spending a lot of money, never saving it. So still, am I eligible?
So let's take an example to understand this. Ramadan the first, let's say I'm earning $200,000 a year. But in my bank, because of the amount I'm spending, I have like $10 or $100. Next Ramadan the first, in my bank, I only have $500 because I'm spending everything. You don't have to give zakah. There is no zakat on that person. You need to have that money saved. Yes, brother. Sure. So the question is, some organizations, what they do is, let's say they're in Syria, and instead of giving money directly to the poor, they give them warm clothing, or they give them food. Is that permissible? Yes, that's permissible. So long as the poor people need it and they understand it. It's not like, oh, the poor people, they need something, and I'm just buying something else. Because so to make it a bit technical, the way it works is, when I give the money, I can either give the money or give something to the poor that they need. Give them something that they need, like open up a business for them, give them clothing, whatever the case, that's fine, so long as it's something that they know and they need. So in Syria, for instance, when they're giving clothing during the cold winter time, they know that they need that, so when they're buying that, they're acting as agents on their behalf and they're giving that in accounts. Yes, brother.
I know that they are in debt.
Yeah.
And they're delaying to pay. So can I pay zakah?
Give them zakah? So let's take an example. I owe somebody $100,000, but I own multiple properties that the value of is like $200,000, $300,000. No, you can't give that person zakat. Because even though they owe money, the value of the land that they owe is more. And for receiving zakah, you can have extra wealth that's more than the amount that is for the nisab. Sorry? Oh, the masarif of zakah, yeah. Yeah. So, وَابْنِ fi sabilillah is where a lot of them are at. وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ refers to a traveler. Yeah. So the ulama say